All right, students, Chapter 8 deals with the troubles and complex situation that the new country was in right after after the revolution. You'll see that things don't go real smoothly for them because they're a brand new baby country and they have got all these things to handle on their own now that they had counted on the government in Britain to handle for them before. This section is really long, the first section of Chapter 8, so I'm going to break it in two pieces for you. You need to know that the very first document that the United States operated under was the Articles of Confederation, not the U.S. Constitution. And you'll see why this didn't work out real well for them, but we won't talk about the Constitution yet for a little bit. So please understand, first document, Articles of Confederation. Before the war was even over, Congress asked all the states to write their own state constitutions because they realized they were going to have to operate and have some sort of government and organization. And so a lot of the states, because they were tired of all the central power from Britain, their state constitutions were purposely made the governor's position weak. Almost all of them had a bicameral legislature, and you need to know the term bicameral. That means two houses. Bi, like bicycle, has two wheels. So two houses, that means a Senate and a House of Representatives. Although they didn't all call them that. They don't all call them Senate and House of Representatives. Texas has, of course, Texas is not even on the scene at this point in time, but you kind of probably remember from last year, Texas's governor is one of the weakest governors in the country. So Texas's constitution purposely made the governor extremely weak on purpose. They don't want central control. They don't want central power. All right. And now they have to set up a national government as well. And they agreed that's going to be a constitutional republic. Now, just because we call it a constitutional republic doesn't mean they have a constitution. So please, we don't have a constitution yet. We're operating under Articles of Confederation. In a constitutional republic, what that means is you elect representatives, which we do, and which they did. They have been doing that since House of Burgesses back in the 1600s. So, that's what they're going with. They're going to elect representatives to make decisions. The reason this is important is because if we didn't elect representatives, we would all have to stop whatever we do all the time and go vote on every single decision we make. That would be impossible. It would slow things down so that we would never get anything done worse than already is. And we wouldn't want to do that. We don't want to stop everything we're doing to vote on every last thing that happens. So we have representatives that do that for us. So how do they create these things? And what is inside the Articles of Confederation? You'll see that it doesn't look like the Constitution at all, really. So Congress has the power to do these things: conduct foreign affairs, maintain and armed forces, borrow money, and issue currency. That means they can borrow money and they can print money, all right? They can have an army, and they are going to conduct foreign affairs, our relationship with other countries. Congress does not have the power to regulate trade, force citizens to join the army, so there's no such thing as a draft, and they cannot tax anyone, so there's going to be no taxing from Congress. If Congress needs money or troops, it has to ask the states nicely, and the states don't have to provide either one of those things. So in a time of war, which we've just gotten done with a war, and we're not anticipating another one, but if one would come along, the country as a whole has no way of answering that problem. They cannot tax in order to fund the war, and they cannot call up troops in a draft in order to staff the war. They have to depend on states to do that for them. The brand new government has no president. Okay, so that's very different from what we know. Every single state has to approve all of the articles that are in the Articles of Confederation and any amendments to them. In other words, if one single state objects, it goes down the tubes. Okay, everybody has to be unanimous. Every state has to agree. And each state has one vote regardless of population. So that means Georgia has the same amount of vote as Virginia, or Virginia has the same amount of vote as Rhode Island. So that each state has exactly the equal amount of vote. Now, there's an argument among the states about what to do with the Western lands, and I'm going to show you a map in a minute. You're thinking, well, who cares? But you'll see why it makes a difference. And that delays the ratification of this Articles of Confederation for a while until the new government can come up with a policy. They have to come up with some way to deal with this because it's very unfair So let me show you the map and talk a little bit about it. So here is the map. This is why it was unfair. So look at this map. States like Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, and look at Connecticut. Connecticut thinks it can go all the way west to the Mississippi River. Massachusetts thinks it goes all the way west to the Mississippi River. Those states who thought that they could claim land that goes all the way west to the Mississippi River, you see what a huge advantage they had. And the little states, well, they didn't used to be little, but they're little in comparison now. Pennsylvania and New York, they're like, wait just a minute, this isn't fair, because this doesn't give us, what was going to happen is this. Those states like Virginia and North Carolina and Georgia, they're going to sell off their land to people, and they're going to make money off of it. But those other states don't have that option. And so now there's this big quarrel, as you can imagine there would be, about what to do with this land. And so until that gets solved, no one's signing on those articles. So right away, the brand new government is having arguments among itself already. Okay, so they set up these policies. Now, you need to know these two policies. One of them is called the Land Ordinance. The reason you need to know them is because they affect how we add land and how we divide up land and sell it off for a long time. The Land Ordinance is in 1785. It's a process to survey all the lands north of the Appalachian, west of the Appalachians and north of the Ohio River. So something called the Northwest Territory. If you see this little map up here I've got, it divides all the land up into 6 square mile wide townships. If you fly in an airplane over places like Ohio and Indiana, you can look down on the land and you can still see a grid pattern. And the grid pattern is not just because farmers have fields in a grid. The actual little cities and towns are divided up into this grid. I had no idea why that I grew up in some place called Anderson Township, Ohio. Why wasn't it called a county? Why was it? In fact, it was inside something called a county, but I grew up in Anderson Township. Well, here's why. That's why. Because it was part of the land that had been divided up in this land ordinance back in 1785. So that's why you need to know this thing, is because the names and the things that are on the map today are affected by something that happened back then. But the purpose of this was to sell the land off to make money. Okay, so that's the thing. This is hugely important, this Northwest Ordinance, even more important than the Land Ordinance. If you look at the map up at the top, those things in that area, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, those areas, those are the Northwest Territory states. That's what they called the Northwest Territory, because for them that's what it was. After all, their country ends at the Mississippi River, and so that is Northwest. This is the method by which we add states. If we had a brand new state added now, it would have to meet the requirements in this ordinance. Now, when you see the requirements, you'll realize that if we were going to add a state, it would already meet the requirements, unless it was like maybe the state of Moon or something. But the point is that this Northwest Ordinance was put in place, and from there on forward, this is how we added states. This was passed in 1787. It creates the Northwest Territory, and those lands were divided into 3 to 5 smaller territories, which then became states. It said this: when the territory gets to be a population of 60,000 residents, people can ask to become a state. When it's a territory, before this, when it's a territory, the government appoints a governor. Okay, they don't have any elected representatives or anything. 60,000 people, you apply to become a state, and then you can set up your own state government. You can start having a House of Representatives and a Senate, and then you can start functioning like a state. You can send senators and representatives to Washington. The Northwest Ordinance has a Bill of Rights for the settlers in the territory. It guarantees freedom of religion, a trial by jury, and outlaws slavery in the Northwest Territory. That's pretty important. You can see that even back in the 1780s, there were people at work trying to get rid of slavery in the government. Slowly but surely, they were hoping they could, even though, people had to sign on, they're hoping to get rid of it a little over time. But like I said, this is how we add states forever. As we spread westward, if we were going to add a state today, Puerto Rico, for instance. Now, Puerto Rico meets all of these standards because it already has a population of 60,000 people. So we could add it immediately. But if we were going to colonize a place that didn't have 60,000 people, it would have to meet this threshold unless they somehow change it, which they have not in all these hundreds of years. It would have to meet this threshold and go through this process in order to become a state. All right, I'm going to stop here and come back to this later.